Sanding. What is sanding? Sanding is the process in which the surface of the wood is rubbed gently using a sandpaper. Why is it required? Raw wooden surfaces generally have rough edges, jutting wood fibers, and stray dust and dirt particles that may cause major hindrance in obtaining a good wood finish. The process of sanding is used to even out the rough edges, uproot the jutting fibers, and remove all kinds of impurities. Moreover, the wooden surface even becomes dry and smooth in between coats, and dust, wax and oil particles settle over it. Such irregularities cause defective finish and adhesion issues. Hence, sanding is required in between coats as well. Types of sanding paper. There are various types of sanding paper available in the market. These are graded based on their granularity, which determines the number of grids of sand granules per square inch. The granularity ranges from less than 100 to 2000 grids per square inch. The higher the grids per square inch, the finer is the sandpaper. They are available in various shapes and sizes depending on the type of use. Sanding paper are made up of different materials, out of which the most commonly available types in the Indian market are silicon carbide and aluminium oxide. For the purpose of processing wood, it is advisable to use the ones made up of aluminium oxide, which are popularly referred to as bubblu paper in India. These can be broadly categorized into two types based on their usage: used on raw wood and used on painted wood. For raw wood, the sanding paper used for sanding of raw wood surfaces is generally coarse. Start sanding the surface with the sandpaper of grid 80, followed by that of 100, 120 and 180 in continuous successions. However, do note that using sandpaper of grid higher than 180 would lead to a non-uniform color during the staining process or inadequate adhesion subsequently. In case of veneers, start sanding with sandpaper 180 since all veneers are already sanded with grid 120 while being manufactured in factories. Also, since most veneers are extremely thin sheets with a thickness of as low as 0.2 millimeters, hence sanding with papers with a grid below 180 can reduce the thickness further and spoil the texture of the veneer. For paints, the sanding paper made for paints is finer and is used on wooden surfaces coated with paint. The grid size ranges from 220 to 2000. For sanding on coated wood, start sanding the surface with 220 grid sandpaper and move up to grid 400. For products like Asian Paints Woodtech Polyester, sanding papers ranging from grid 600 to 2000 is required. The sanding could be done following two procedures: wet sanding using standard silicon carbide papers or dry sanding using aluminium oxide papers known as bubblu papers. Sanding processes. There are majorly three sanding processes: hand sanding, sanding using Scotch Block, and machine sanding. It is important though to follow the safety measures before starting with the sanding process. Hand sanding. Hand sanding is the most popular sanding method in the Indian market, where sanding is done manually with a handheld sanding paper. However, it is difficult to maintain uniform pressure across the surface, which often causes finger marks, scratches, and adhesion issues. Sanding using Scotch Block. In this process, the sandpaper is wrapped around a Scotch block, which is then used for manual sanding. In this type of sanding, the pressure is more uniform and hence a better finish is obtained. Machine sanding. There are two different types of sanding machines available: orbital sanding machine and square sanding machine. The sandpaper is fixed onto the machine and the sanding is done automatically. Although the machine has to be moved over the surface manually, the speed of the sanding machine can be controlled. The dust is collected automatically in case of the orbital sander. However, for the square sander generally, a dust collector has to be attached externally. It is very easy to obtain a uniform finish using machine sanding. Do note that the square sander could create wavy patterns on the surface being sanded when not held properly. Whereas the orbital sander does not actually rotate, just vibrates, which eliminates the chances of scratches and non-uniform sanding even further. Useful sanding tip: the textured grains of the wood get damaged when sanded across. Hence, it is important to note that the sanding should always be done along the grain lines of the wooden surface.